look at why a midlife crisis is probable and what are some of the forces that bring it about and what are some of the constructive or destructive elements of a midlife crisis. Now, the midlife crisis is another wave of the adolescent crisis. So we're born into helpless dependency as infants. We start growing up as children, and by the time we're 7, 8, 9, 10, and moving into adolescence, we are aware of the injustices, the unfairness, the dysfunction, the hypocrisy, and the pain of the current system. And so the automatic sympathy of the child becomes the antipathy, the reactionary antipathy of the adolescent. Fuck you. The whole world is full of shit. This sucks, and here's why. And we have an itemized list, and an infant, a child, relative to the world of giants, that is the grown-up world, exaggerates or really focuses on everything that's uncomfortable, everything that's painful, right? Because when you're very small and the world is very big, the imperfections in the world have a lot more impact on something very small. So the adolescent really has a lot of pent-up pain and anger to deal with. Now, hopefully, we move through adolescence to the point of integration in some sense of, what the cult or cultural system is. And, in that first rebellion, the general trend is to leave home and spread outside of the family system and into the larger cultural system. We get a job, we fall into some form of cult norm, doing some of the things that the cult does, dressing in similar ways. We somewhat learn our own version of the cult. Now, just as child moving into adolescence realizes what doesn't work about the family system, after, 20 or so years of the cult system, there is a second realization, a second awakening that the cult is fucked up, that that the economic system is unfair and rewards dysfunctional behavior, that the prison or justice system is not that just and is incredibly wasteful, that the ecological system is not necessarily going in a good direction, that the social norms are not necessarily leading to good places. There's a lot of divorce, a lot of addiction, a lot of pain. And so what this does, in a similar way that the innocence and the naivete of an infant, of a child, embraces the family and then tumbles and burns and experiences traumatic abuse in various ways before waking up and saying, this is wrong, I protest, I reject this part of the system. Right? As you go through into the larger expansion of cult interaction and cult conformity, and fitting into the various systems, the immigration system, the justice system, the education system, the economic system, the spousal system, the relationship system. Right? Here's what we do in our cult. We send little texts, we do little lies, we betray one another, we meet in bars, we get all excited, and then we get all disappointed, and then the statistics are dreadful. 70% dissatisfaction in jobs, 70% dissatisfaction in the country, 70% dissatisfaction in relationships. So it's a grating system, and but when you're just getting a career, I mean, it's similar. It's important to understand why is there this blind acceptance in infancy or going into young adulthood. An infant has absolutely no other option and is completely dependent on the parents. But so is the young adult leaving the family system and going out in the cult. You don't have an alternate money system to plug in, right? You have no wealth, generally speaking. You don't have a reputation. You don't have your own outside friends. So you've pretty much got to get a foothold in the cult or culture that you find yourself in and gain resources, gain confidence, gain skills, and at the same time, slowly learn what's not working about the system. And by the time you're in your 40s or early 50s, what's typically happened is similar to what's happened by an adolescent, right? By the time you're an adolescent, you're not as dependent as you were as an infant, right? You would die if you weren't given a breast or bottle of milk at age 1. Right? But an adolescent can go and get their own milk. An adolescent may be able to go and get a job, maybe be able to run away from home. And so the greater competency and independent access to resources, to survival and security, makes questioning the status quo tolerable. Right? For an infant to say, this is an abusive house, this is a dysfunctional family, I'm being raised by idiots, is a terrifying realization for an infant because there's nothing they can do about it, right? So it's kind of on the verge of independence that we tend to be able to speak our mind, complete our full thoughts, right? And the same is true in spousal relationships, right? If you're in a completely dependent relationship, you don't have life skills, you don't have savings, you don't have good friendships outside of the relationships, you don't have a supportive family, and you don't have your own income. Well, you can't afford to look at the innate imperfections of your partner. Because if you decide, well, this isn't the right one for me, you're homeless, without any money, you don't have any skills, no support, so you lose all your needs, survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, just collapsing if you leave a relationship. Now, at the same time, when you become self-confident, self-loving, earn your own income, develop your own life skills, have your own nest egg, well, now the relationship becomes a preference. And now you can say, you know what, I've always hated this thing about this and this and this. But, before when I was in a dependent relationship, I didn't want to rock the boat, right? Nobody rocks the boat, statistically speaking, when they're in a deeply dependent relationship, because it's self-destructive to do so. What if the boat tips you out and you've got nowhere to swim, right? And so the same type of dynamic happens at a cultural and a larger level in our 40s. By that time, and it doesn't always happen, but in a healthy dynamic, it happens. It generally happens. It happens more often than not. So if things are progressing well, you have, enough of a nest egg, enough confidence, enough access to various backups and supports. Hopefully you've traveled a little bit to other cultures and countries to realize that, yeah, they actually do know how to do things in other parts of the world, and they're different, and those differences are better and worse than my way of doing things. So my culture doesn't have a monopoly on intelligence. Well, this creates the courage to rock a deeper boat, which is the cultural boat. My cult says, looking good is important. My cult says that making as much money as possible is important. My cult says that youth is more attractive than this. My cult says that, this is the way to do things. These are the values of my cult. But you look around by this point and you say, bullshit, my cult doesn't know what it's doing. I looked at this, I looked at this, I look at all these people, right? This person, was doing the responsible thing and then they died of cancer. And the cult didn't have an answer, right? And this person was doing their thing and they died of addiction. And this person is constantly destroying their potential in a variety of ways. And the cult's not doing anything about that. And, there's all these incompetent parents and these idiotic, political figures that, keep promising endless things that never do them. And, and you realize the whole thing is full of it, right? It's complete and utter bullshit, right? It would be so much easier for it to be 10 times more intelligent. But we're stuck in the past. We're stuck in our little cult dynamic, our little system of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in a normal way. And so that kind of ripens things for, this next rebellion, which is the ability to objectively look at one's cult and say, yeah, the diet is 4 out of 10, the relationship protocol, 3 out of 10, the competency of the government, 3 out of 10, the level of corruption as well as incompetence, maybe 30%. And you look at this critically and you say, this is nuts, right? And this sets the stage for a really important form of independence, which is, in infancy, in adolescence, we're becoming free of our infant dependency on our parents. And as we, become adults, we try to find our own version of integrating with the system, with the cult. And that takes us to a certain level. But this is about turning inward in a deeper way and saying, these idiots don't know what they're talking about. This person says this person says that. You read 200 or 300 self-help books, and one says, be sure to get up early in the morning, and one says, do your best work late at night, and another says it's all about trauma, and another person says it's all about self-image. And you realize, they're just spouting, to a large extent, some elements of what works for them. And they don't even necessarily know what they're talking about. I've written plenty of books, and my life is frequently a mess in terms of how much sustainable well-being I'm experiencing in the way that I'm doing a variety of choices, right? I mean, it's a different skill to be. You can have articulating talent, but that doesn't mean one has a talent for living well. If you're trying to learn the art of living well, you want to learn that from someone who lives well, rather than someone with a great articulating talent who is not living well. And so and that takes a little bit of analysis and intelligence, right? You want to learn from people who are doing what you want to do better. But this, we move through a rebellion and a waking up of the dysfunction, right? And so in order to prepare for this birth into what we could call a spiritual, inner directed life, right? So going from adolescence, into, 20s and 30s, we could say that we're trying to succeed within the paradigm, within the framework of the culture to a large extent. But as that fails, meaning as that becomes painful, as that becomes disappointing, as that becomes horrific to varying degrees, as it becomes boring, as it becomes exhausting, it's like, this is it? So let's talk a little bit about that phase and what goes on there. One of the things that happens when you're poor is it's very easy to believe the cult lie that when you are rich, all your problems will be solved and you are happy. And it's very easy to believe that because when you're poor, you have plenty of problems and it looks like money would solve many of them. And so, and as you make a little progress, you experience some benefits, your survival goes up, etc. And so you can believe that. But by the time that you are rich, a shocking, reverberating, sound ruptures the space, and it becomes clear that money is not going to solve all the problems, and that the most important problems, once you're beyond survival and security, the problems of love and belonging, the problems of meaning and purpose, the problems of sustainable relationships, the problem of joyful well-being, that those problems cannot be solved with money and are becoming louder. So the problems that can't be solved with money get louder when money solves all the other problems and are not distracting you, right? And so this is the first crisis. Money is not going to do it. But you don't know that until you have enough money to realize that I feel worse. I feel worse. Now, one of the reasons I felt worse when I reached this point was when you believe in something, even if it's wrong, it gives you momentum and direction and purpose, and that is good. Meaning it feels good to have direction, momentum, and purpose and have discipline and be moving towards something. Right? So moving towards it, financial independence and all that. It feels good. But once you have that, and there is no cessation of pain. If anything, the pain gets worse and it becomes more psychological in nature. Well, there's multiple problems all hitting at once. First of all, well, where do I go from here? If that doesn't work, where do I point myself? And the cult has no answer to that, which is disheartening, right? The cult just says, just keep making more and more money, right? Yeah, that's not doing it. Well, just make some more, right? And so then you realize the cult is nuts. So first of all, there's no new goal. Second of all, you realize the cult is nuts. And thirdly, you lose that sense of momentum, discipline, and growth. So there's a sense of stagnation, and that feels worse than moving towards something. So that whole dynamic, if you're competent enough to reach that stage. And I would say that there's a tremendous amount of, quote, self-sabotage, but really it's avoiding this territory. Meaning it's not hard to become financially independent in a country, like the United States, at least in, 2023. It's not hard. Right? It's easier in many ways than it has ever been, and it's easier in the U.S. and than it's than in most countries in the world to start a business, do whatever. It's not hard to do the right thing to make money. But it is very hard to understand why people won't do it and don't do it. Like, I refused to invest or save any money, no matter how much I made, until my early 40s. Why? Right? I think a lot of it is, certain problems come into focus when the money problems are solved, and they're more difficult than money problems. Why? Because the cult has all kinds of ways to solve money problems. There's bankruptcy. There's all kinds of different ways you can solve money problems, and they're all spelled out. And the cult is very money-oriented. But if you solve all your money problems, then you have a new set of problems, and the cult has no idea what to do with them, right? And so it can be beneficial to stay making money, losing money, making money, losing money, because you're in very comfortable known territory. And I think there's a fair amount of that going on. But when you do hit it at some point, if you allow yourself to succeed, then you face the thing, money is not going to do it, I need a new purpose, and I don't know what it is, right? So that's the first crisis. The second crisis is that as one is successful enough to afford to enter the taboo territory of questioning the emperor, questioning, does the emperor have any clothes? I mean, is all this full of shit? It's difficult to do that from a place of fear and insecurity. But many people reach that point of relative comfortable affluence and security. I know what I'm doing. I can keep my job if I want to. I can get a few other jobs. I can live here. I can live there. And so I'm not really worried about that. Well, now I can ask and be objective and start looking at these things. And the cult doesn't look very good. After decades of seeing its flaws and being able to have a more open mind, the cult does not look very good. And that creates a crisis because many people do not want to look at that. They're not ready to. So that can create some loneliness. Many people are threatened of looking at that. That can create some conflict. And then most of us have not been taught what to do once we discover that. And so that's a crisis. Now, the other crisis is that, once we meet our outer needs, like there's all kinds of pains, shame, fear, anxiety, depression, loneliness, hurt, rage, all kinds of things happening throughout our life. But when we're in survival and security mode, we have to say, well, I can't deal with that right now. Just suppress these feelings, move on, get my work done. I have to stay focused on getting and making enough money to take responsibility and do all this stuff and invest in my future. I can't deal with you now, depression. I'm just going to go to work depressed and I'm going to get through it and I'm going to pretend I'm not depressed and all that. But what happens when you reach a certain level of success is there's no longer a compelling reason to say, let's tough it out and make an extra few $100 today. It's like, hello, we've been doing that for 2 fucking decades. How much money does it take before there's actually time for me, time for my feelings and the fact that I don't really like this job. I'm not sure if I like this marriage. I don't like the role I play in these social things. The whole thing is, I've got to think this thing through. Well, what comes up then? Layer upon layer of pain, shame, frustration, depression, all those things that were pushed down to say that, getting through and getting by and making money has to come first and then you'll come later. Well, later is here, right? And so things start to come up, right? Now, if you decide you do want to quit your job or make some more time for yourself. Because often if you don't let them come up, there's a disease, there's a cancer or something that demands time. If you don't take it, it demands it, right? So you now got an illness and a life-threatening situation. You take time off work, and then you start feeling and thinking about your thoughts and feelings. And the first ones are always painful, right? We haven't been suppressing our ecstatic joy. We've been suppressing our irate rage, right? So now that there's no pressure, like we don't have to pretend to like the boss or whatever, that all comes out. Fuck that, do this, But that doesn't feel very good. And it also can feel like a bottomless pit because we've been stuffing this in for years in an emotionally illiterate culture. And now it's coming back up again. It's like floating up to the surface. And the first feelings to come up are the most intense and the most painful. And we don't know what we're doing with any of that. So that's a big crisis. I don't know what I'm doing. And the cult doesn't know what it's doing either. It's not helping me. And then there's another thing, which is the time crunch, right? It's fine when you're 20 or 30 or whatever to say, I'll get to that later. When I grow up, I'll get to that, right? That's fine. Another decade, another decade, another decade. But by around age 50, if you haven't moved any closer to your dreams, you haven't become the most famous person, whatever it is, all those things, those fantasies in adolescence are dead. Meaning you cannot look them in the face and say, yeah, I'm going to do that one day. Yeah, right. I haven't done anything for 30 years on that. And now I'm older and it's harder and I'm not even sure I want it. But all those dreams you have to face them and say, yeah, they're not going to happen, right? And that's painful, right? So, and so they stop providing comfort. Like one day I'm going to be famous and do this. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Right? No, it's not going to happen. And so that's not going to be the answer either. So then we're stuck, well, it's just me then in my life, and I don't really like the way I'm living and stuff like that. But that hits the fan, that you have to face and let go of these things that were going to happen someday. They're not happening. That's painful. And then the final thing is, your energy level is lower. You're maybe a little bit more beat up around the edge. Maybe you're a bit more tender. You don't have the reserves to kind of go out and start a whole new thing. It's, you realize things are complicated and, tiring. And so, yeah, I could go do that, but I feel a bit tired, right? Or I don't know if I want to face 200 rejections to get to that point where that one person says yes. And usually the happily ever after relationship stories are well over by 40s. I'm going to meet someone, I'm going to fall in love, I'm going to live happily ever after. That's completely crashed and burned by, the 30 or 40th relationship that hasn't worked out. And, so all of these things are coming together. And then life seems to be getting narrower, shorter, right? Maybe I'm not going, if I retire, maybe my financial life will get narrower. My health deteriorates, my health world gets narrower. Some of my friends are dying or may die, or, it's getting narrower, right? And so we have to then look to what may be a more diminished future, in a culture that doesn't value the elderly. So all of these things are the reason why we find ourselves willing to take an honest look at ourselves and the cult and say, this is bullshit, right? I'm lying to myself. I'm not the best boyfriend or girlfriend. I clearly don't know what I'm doing if we're halfway honest with ourselves. And a lot of the people around us don't either. My friends are not the coolest, most amazing people. They have plenty of faults and stuff that I have to put up. So it's really, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of dysfunction, there's a lot of failure, and I'm not interested in glossing over it with a someday it's going to all change. So this is painful, this is difficult, this is hard, and it's all coming around this time. And so we can start tearing up things. No, I'm not going to count on the cult for that. No, I'm not liking that. Some perfect person isn't going to come along and rescue all this stuff. My country is not the best. My religion, there's all kinds of politics there. It's really, really crazy. So this is kind of the cultural adolescence where we rebel and acknowledge how fucked up our culture is. But this begins to crack the default attachment, the default cultural identity, the pattern, the identity of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that's normal, that I've been plugging into. I've been saying, I'm an American, I'm a this, and this is what we do, right? And that's me, right? When we really get that, there's a tremendous amount of chronic, unnecessary suffering built into every level of our cult. There's a permission. No, it doesn't know what it's doing. It's killing me as much as it's helping me. Maybe I'm got a chronic disease and I'm not sure how much time. Fuck the cult. Fuck the cult. I'm going to start exploring who I am. I'm going to explore my relationship with God, Goddess, all that is. I'm going to explore who I am in my creative sense, and I don't really care what other people say. I don't care what the cult says. I don't care what the norms are. I don't care what the experts say. I'm going to be me, right? So at around 50, what you see is the birth of what we could call a spiritual adult, right? We can say a competent adult is born often in, age 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, a competent adult that starts to know how to take care of their outer life, but is still very plugged into the cult. And in the midlife crisis, there is the potential of really grasping all the things that are dysfunctional to such an extent that we can liberate and give ourselves permission to follow the inner voice. To follow the voice that says, I don't really care what dignity looks like in my culture. I like dogs. I'm going to get 3 dogs, and I'm going to play with those dogs every day. And that's really important to me. And if someone doesn't like my dogs, I don't care. If this and that, I'll move, right? I'm going to do this with my dogs. Or, what a miserable country this is. I'm going to go overseas and I'm going to do this and this and this. I'm going to start painting and I don't care if anyone likes it or not. I'm going to paint because I notice I enjoy it. And that's it, right? There's a tremendous liberation of the self from the cultural identity that is founded on grasping the true level of dysfunction within the culture, right? And so that is the possibility that can come out of a midlife crisis. And the worst thing that can happen, I think, is a falling back. And this happens when we don't understand the need for reserves, meaning it helps to go through this to have a certain amount of money, to have a certain amount of skills, to know what our options are, to have, if by age 50 you've visited 7 countries or more, 7 different cultures, then you can know, okay, well, I really like that one. If by age 50 you've got, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank, or a certain lifestyle that allows for a steady stream, and you've covered this and that, and you're relatively free, well, then you can say, well, I'm going to take up painting, and I don't really care about this and that. But if you are, in debt, and credit card debt, and living paycheck to paycheck, then that impulse may come, but it may be still too risky, right? It hasn't blossomed into full independence at a level where you can say, yeah, I'm going to follow that. I'm going to follow that, right? And so as a younger person, I think the gift to that stage, as a younger person, the gift to one's 50-year-old is to prepare, to eliminate debts, to create a diversified source of support and resources, to gain experience of where we like to live in the world and what kind of people we like to spend time with. And the shift goes from learning enough, being enough, doing enough, making enough, having enough, right? These are the younger ego stages, right? Do I have enough? Do I have enough? Am I good enough? Am I good enough? Am I learning enough? Am I learning enough? These are the younger ego stages, and you have to go through them, and you have to learn enough, and you have to have enough, and you have to be enough, right? So that by age 50, when you say, I am enough, and I'm willing to be enough, that's not just resting on air, right? That can rest on a certain amount of competency and skill, that we can give that to ourselves. And, if our boss says, oh, no, you're not, then we can walk away. If a partner says, you're not enough at all, we can say, okay, well, off you go, right? And then we can enjoy being enough in that state. And in that state of knowing ourselves, finding ourselves, discovering ourselves, and being enough in that state, from that point is a really beautiful point to start saying, I see. I'm enough, right? And from this place, I can meet other people who are in a similar place and enjoying who they want to be. They're enjoying who they want to be. We're enjoying who we want to be. And you have a different level of authenticity, a different level of freedom, a different level of transcendence into something bigger than the box of our culture.